The evidence for evolution made easy.
Direct observation. Creationists sometimes say that evolution cannot be proven because it has never been seen to occur. This is not a very reasonable requirement when you consider that evolution almost always takes hundreds or thousands of generations to produce significantly different new species. When shown examples of speciation that we can observe within our lifetimes, creationists claim that that's just adaptation, not speciation, and that adaptation has limits. However, none of them have ever been able to demonstrate or even propose a biological mechanism which stops small changes from accumulating into big changes. A journey of 1,000 miles always begins with a single step. The same is true for evolution. Mutation and natural selection modifies the descendants of animals very gradually, generation after generation, into new animals, accumulating small beneficial changes into big changes. Despite the long time scales ordinarily involved, there are many cases of evolutionary change we can directly observe within a reasonable time frame. One great example of this is the lizards of Podmurcaru Island. In the 1970s, 5 pairs of a species of lizard called the Italian wall lizard were introduced to the Croatian island Podmurcaru from a neighboring island named Podkopisti. About 37 years later, scientists returned and discovered that the descendants of those lizards had developed remarkable physical changes from their ancestral species. They had a larger average size, and in particular a larger head, which gave them increased bite strength. This was an adaptation to a different food source, as the new island had much more vegetation. On the relatively barren island Podkopisti, they had subsisted mostly on insects. Because plants are tough and fibrous, high bite forces allow the lizards to chomp off smaller pieces from the plants, which makes digestion easier. Examination of the lizard's digestive tracts revealed something even more surprising. Eating more plants caused the development of new structures called cecal valves, a relatively rare adaptation, which slows the passage of food by creating fermentation chambers in the gut, where microbes can break down the difficult-to-digest portions of plants. By isolating a tiny population of lizards in a new environment, researchers were able to demonstrate evolution in action in just a few decades, with dramatic results, including the emergence of a whole new anatomical structure. Another well-known study is the long-term evolution experiment led by Dr. Richard Lenski using E. coli bacteria. Since bacteria reproduce very quickly, they provide an accelerated way to observe evolution. Since 1988 and continuing to this day, Lenski has been tracking genetic changes in 12 initially identical populations of E. coli. As of 2014, each of the 12 isolated populations have reproduced for 58,000 generations. The researchers have observed a wide array of genetic changes. Some evolutionary adaptations have occurred in all 12 populations, while others have only appeared in one or a few populations. One particularly striking adaptation was the evolution of a strain of E. coli that was able to use citric acid as a carbon source in an oxygen-rich environment, a completely new trait. This clearly demonstrates how evolution produces new species. Of course, the descendants of the bacteria are still bacteria, as creationists like to point out, but they're a new kind of bacteria, and that is how evolution always works. Mammals are a special kind of tetrapod. Primates are a special kind of mammal. Apes are a special kind of primate. And humans are a special kind of ape. Animals never entirely stop being what their ancestors were. They just change into new versions of that animal. It generally takes large spans of time before the differences outnumber the similarities, and the new animals are considered a new species. Another way we can directly observe evolution is that we can sometimes see the different stages of development of structures within existing creatures. The eye is a great example of this. Even complex structures like the eye have evolutionary pathways that we now understand and involve many gradual steps. Since eyes are so useful, they have actually evolved many times in separate ancestral lines of animals. Another great example of convergent evolution. And we can actually see the different stages of this evolution in living animals today. In its most basic form, an eye can be just a few light-sensitive cells that can detect light or dark, such as the two-cell eye of the marine ragworm embryo. The next step would be developing a cup-shaped area of light-sensitive cells, which would add the useful ability to determine the direction light was coming from. And we find these in some flatworms today. The pinhole camera eye developed as the cup-shaped pit deepened into a chamber. By the reduction of the size of the opening, the organism acquired true imaging, allowing for fine directional sensing and even some shape sensing. Eyes of this nature are currently found in the nautilus. The next step came about as a clear membrane grew to close over the eye opening, which served to keep sand and water out of the eye interior and also acted as a lens that focused the light and provided a clearer image. Today, we see these rudimentary lenses in the stem-shaped eyes of the conch. From there, it only takes some small refinements, such as lens shaping and muscles to better control focus, to get to the highly capable eyes we humans have and share with most other vertebrates. Not only does this dramatically demonstrate that complex structures can evolve through gradual steps, it is important to notice that there is no logical reason for an intelligent designer to give different animals varying sight capability, when he certainly could have given them all the eyes of a hawk. Only evolution explains the large variety of eye types that we find in nature. And these eye types clearly demonstrate the gradual steps involved in the evolution of the eye. In conclusion, as you can see by now, to disprove evolution, you would have to explain away tons of evidence. Many creationists simply deny that this evidence exists, and they imply that all scientists are involved in a conspiracy. That, of course, is absurd. It's been over 150 years since Darwin published his groundbreaking work, and hundreds of thousands of scientists have been busy studying the evidence ever since. Yes, creationists have made some counter-arguments to these lines of evidence that I have presented, but the scientific community that studies the evidence and understands it best has repeatedly found those counter-arguments to be without merit. Some creationists even go so far as to say that evolution is not true science because it is not directly observable or testable, and they falsely distinguish it as a historical science and say it requires faith because, well, you weren't there to see it. But nothing could be further from the truth. I have already shown how evolution is observed directly, but moreover, the evidence left behind by evolution in living creatures, in fossils, and in DNA provide direct and conclusive evidence of the evolution that occurred in the past. And also, evolution is testable. But since evolution occurs very slowly, and did occur mostly in the past, the tests we can perform are different than those kinds of tests that we would perform on an immediate phenomenon such as gravity or a chemical reaction. Evolution is tested simply by looking for more evidence. DNA is still being sequenced and analyzed. Fossils are still being found, and new living species are still being discovered. Time and time again, these new discoveries fit the evolutionary model, and none contradict it. Moreover, there have been many cases in which pieces of evidence that had not yet been found were predicted to exist. A great example is the transitional form from fish to land animals. Based on the evidence already gathered and an understanding of evolution, scientists predicted in which geographic location and in which layers of strata such a transitional fossil might be found. And after looking in those places, the discovery of Tiktaalik fulfilled that prediction. Also, all scientific claims are always open to falsification, and scientists actually work hard at proving each other wrong, and often do. But while some of the details of how evolution works are still being discovered and debated, no one has ever come close to falsifying the fact of evolution, or discovered any evidence that calls it into question, or provided a better explanation for the evidence we have. With all these confirmed lines of evidence, and direct observation, and testability, and predictive ability, and falsifiability, evolution meets all the criteria of a real science. And creationism, by the way, meets none of them. In fact, evolution is one of the most well-evidenced conclusions in all of science. There is so much evidence that paring it down to this brief summation was a challenge. For every example given, there are many more. Research it more yourself and you will see. But be sure to choose good scientific sources or articles that reference them. There is a lot of misinformation out there. Beware of any site or publication whose primary agenda is anything other than promotion and education of good science. I encourage you to continue to research and learn about evolution on your own, and hope that you find it as fascinating and enlightening as I do.